Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the March Diamond Valley Writers Guild meeting. I'm so happy to see all the familiar faces and a few new ones, a few writers that I haven't seen in a while, and even on Zoom. A good turnout. Nice to see you guys. Reminders, Zoom participants, please mute your mics, and there'll be question and answers during the presentation. Lynette will be handling the Zoom questions and kind of direct who unmutes there, and I'll be handling the in the room stuff. Regarding the website, Kevin, our vice president, he's up in Calgary, Canada. Kevin?
Well, I haven't done a whole lot on the website this month. Mostly I've been going through the member books and figuring out if people don't renew their memberships by April 1st, which ones I'm going to have to delete. So I've been doing that. Otherwise, I've managed to put the February meeting. The replay is now up on the YouTube channel. And I've been doing some integrations for our new newsletter. So it turns out that Wix changed something and they automatically send a whole bunch of emails that confuse people. So please go to the homepage of the website, and right underneath of our meeting information is the newsletter sign up. And then you'll get another email, and it should all be DVWG branded now. So you'll know who the messages are coming from the new newsletter service. So please get on doing that, because we're having difficulties using the old Gmail system for emailing more than 500 people.
And currently we have over 500 people on our email list. So we have to sometimes go in and pick and choose because we have to go under 5 to get Gmail to not bounce our emails. So we are moving slowly to a new platform for emails, and we'll be launching that with a newsletter. Erin Schock, who lives in Missouri, she's going to be the one heading up that newsletter in the coming months. Again, it's a work in progress. We're looking forward to having a monthly newsletter. So we're going to move on to member benefits and renewals. Jessica, our treasurer.
Hello, everybody. Now, usually I say you all know who I am, but I see so many new faces in the audience, so I will introduce myself. I am Jessica Bruce. I'm the treasurer of Diamond Valley Writers Guild, and I'm the one that gets to deal with all the money and, even more fun, the IRS. So let me tell you why you should become a member. It is not required to be a member to participate in the monthly meetings, but it does help support the Guild. The entire tech setup you see in here, the publications, everything we do is financed by the members. We did just recently raise our prices March 1st from $25 to $30. I know, but don't worry, it's just per year. You pay once, you're good for the entire calendar year, and then you renew again in the spring or winter, whenever you decide to renew. Now, there are some benefits. We don't just take your money and run. The biggest thing is you get to participate in Guild publications. We just released this wonderfully beautiful book. You may ooh and ah. Ooh, ah, yes. And that is completely comprised of members' works. So if you would like to participate in future publications, which I hear rumors there might be more, if you would like to participate in those, you just have to be a member in good standing. The other thing is you get to participate in our monthly shout-outs. Every month we send out successes of book publication, speaking opportunities, anything that you do, you can send out to our over 500 person mailing list. All of them will see your book in their email. Maybe their spam folder, but that's okay. The other thing you can do is we have 2 meetings a year where you get to read your own works. We have our upcoming April poetry where you can read poetry that you write or one that you really, really like. And we also have our October prose reading where you get to write 1,800 words of your own work and read it for the Guild. They're my favorite meetings because you guys get to run the show. You guys get to show off. It's wonderful. I love it. The last thing is if you see what we do up here and you go, wow, that's really cool. I want to be just like them. You can run for board positions too. You have to be a member in good standing, and you can run for elections in October. Now, like I said, it's $30 per year for general membership. If you have any youngins, like kids or nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, anyone that is under in college age, we have a $15 college fee. That did not go up, that stays the same, or high school and under for $10. We like to have people join, bring the younger generation in. So please, if you know younger people and you think they could benefit from us, we really bring them into our meetings, see if they like it. They can participate for free. We have, I don't know, I think we have 2 high school Two high school members right now and about 5 or 6 college members. So we have some youngins and we want to bring in more. Now, if you're wondering, wow, this is so cool, I want to jump on this quick, I want to pay today. Well, I have good news for you. There are multiple ways that you can pay us. 1, you can hand me cash or a check in the back at the end of the meeting, or 2, you can send it to our PayPal account at dvwritersguild@gmail.com, or you can send us a check in the mail to P.O. Box 1154, Hemet, California 92546. I don't think, you can also pay on the website. You can go into the website, buy a membership, that comes straight to us, and you will get a welcome email and everything. I think that's it for membership benefits. Now, I do have one more order of business, so bear with me for just a few moments longer. If you did participate in this, we promised you money in a book. I have those. Finally, snail mail brought the books to us. So if you participated and you want to pick up your book today and your check, you can come see me after the meeting. I will be there with them to give to you. I'll mark you off the list, and then you're free. We have no obligations anymore until the next one. So please do consider joining. You make this guild what it is, and we would love to have you a part of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica. I do want to take this moment to thank our board of directors. I already introduced Kevin online and Lynette, who I'll go back to you for the shout outs, Lynette, in just a second. In the back, Jessica Bruce, who's our treasurer, and Sophia, the quiet one, is our secretary. She doesn't have to talk, she just has to write minutes, and she likes that. We also have our Zoom hybrid team headed up by Liam Bruce. Back in the back, he's been doing that. He drives out from Burbank on Saturday mornings to get here by 8 a.m. to do this for us. So please, a round of applause. He does this sort of stuff for all week for pay, and then on the weekend he comes and does it for us for free. But he's also a writer and has something in the anthology. In fact, the entire board of directors has something in the anthology. Back in the back, Aiden von Beckman, I can't say that, Aiden von Beckman, and he's a poet, and he comes every time he can at 8 o'clock and helps us. And then we also have Angela Little, and she is very, very supportive of the Guild. Thank you all for coming early at 8 o'clock to help us set up. Thank you. Okay, Lynette, shout outs. You've got the floor.
There, this time when I hit audio on, it didn't kick me all the way out of the meeting, so I'm very excited about that. We do monthly shout outs, like you heard Just talking about a little bit, and those are for celebrating your books coming out, speaking engagements, book signings. You got a blog you're going regular and you want to get the word out. Let's celebrate your writing successes every month. Usually I want them all in by the 20th, but today's the 21st, and I wanted to give any new members that might be signing up a chance to be included in this month's shout outs. So still time to get your links in. Make sure you send me a JPEG or some sort of acceptable digital picture of your cover if you've got a book coming out, a sales link for sure, and a brief blurb about your story, whatever you're writing about. It can be anything writing related. So go ahead and send those in to the Guild, and I'll get those and I'll send those out each month to the mailing list. So great perk for being a member, and hope to see everybody celebrating your successes.
Thank you, Lynette. She does a great job, doesn't she? Okay, back to volunteers. If you have a burning desire to get here early, we love having help in the morning or tearing down after the meeting. So see Liam or Jessica in the back about what you can do to help the tech team, the Zoom hybrid team. Accountability groups. It's something we've done before, and we'd like to see that started up again. So if you have a particular genre you write in or have an affection for, or you want to put together something for National Novel Writing Month coming up in November, an accountability group, we would love to have someone head those sorts of little side groups up, or even a critique group. That'd be fine. So email us or talk to one of us and see if we can put something together for members to be able to do via Zoom. It wouldn't be live at different points during the month, or weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever. Tips. We're always looking for people to do a 5-minute tip in our meetings prior to the guest speaker. It could be tech tips, it could be publishing tips, it could be writing tips, it could be grammar tips, 5 minutes or less. So if you have an interest in doing that and a topic you'd like to cover, email the Guild and we'll put you on the agenda for that coming up as well. Now we get to move on to my favorite part of the meeting. Well, okay, so Jonathan's pretty cool too, but My favorite part of the meeting is member successes. This is the opportunity for members to tell us what's happened in the last month, writing-wise. Did you start a project? Did you finish a project? Did you submit something for the first time or the 100th time? Did you get an acceptance on a submission? Do you have a book coming out? Or you on a podcast? So we'll start with Zoom. Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to tell us about a recent success in the last 30 days? Anybody?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Hey, I had a recent success. It's been a long, drawn-out fight with Amazon because it turns out that Kindle is a banned word for a contributor name, and it just happens to be my last name. So after several rounds of reviews with Amazon and having to upload a whole bunch of documents to prove that this is my real name, they finally let me publish that. So my books are now currently on Amazon, which they've never been before. So yay, finally, hurdle crossed.
Which proves you can be successful as a writer without being on Amazon, because Kevin's been doing pretty well in the last few years. Okay, anyone else in the room? Does anyone in the room have a success they would like to share? If not, we'll go back to Zoom participants. Anybody else on Zoom that has something? There's Lynette. Go ahead, Lynette.
I'll jump in. My fairy tale has gone through both editings and come back from copy editing, and I have all the pencil sketches for the illustrations now. So just approved those last night, sent them back to the artist to start getting colorized versions. So getting closer, really excited.
Very exciting. This project she's been working on for quite a while. It may turn into a 3-book series. It's what Very Old Man and the Magic Scroll. Is that it? Yeah, I was involved with some of the earlier beta reading and critiques, and it's a wonderful story, fairy tale. It's going to be just gorgeous. I've seen some of the preliminary drawings. So when it comes out, pick up your copy. Anybody else on Zoom? Anybody? Okay, if not, hold on a second then. I have an announcement. Come on up though, so you can be next, okay? I have an announcement, and that is that I've got a story coming out in an anthology. I think I mentioned it last month. The Villains Club, which is we now have a release date and a buy link, a pre-order buy link. The release date is on April 16th coming up, and it's going to be fun. I'm in there with a couple people that, kind of maybe have published a few things more than I have, but it's my first, one where there's names in there that you would recognize that are fun. Jonathan's got a story in there, Dennis Crosby, who was one of our speakers a couple years ago. So really looking forward to that coming out. Also, the book signing for that is going to be at Mysterious Galaxy on May 23rd. So if you don't have anything to do and you want to go down to San Diego, you'll be able to see all the authors from that at the book signing. Okay, go ahead, Al.
I just remembered that I got an email this last month that my story was accepted for the anthology and the Temecula Valley writers and illustrators. And they're having an anthology coming out, I guess, in April or later. I'm not sure. You can contact Tron Hildahl there or go to their website and find out more about the anthology. But it's going to be fractured fairy tales about modern fairy tales based on old ones with a twist at the end. And I found one on my computer. It was 13,000 words. I somehow massacred over 3,000 of those and got it down below 10,000 and submitted it, thinking, well, there's about a 1 in 100 chance, but it was accepted. So I'm more used to getting a kick in the teeth than getting anything accepted. So that was good. So I've been in 3 or 4 anthologies now, but I've never published any books yet. So that's another thing I've got to do before I go on Boot Hill. I got to get at least 1 book published. But I thought that was really nice. I'm looking forward to reading that anthology. And if you want to see my story, you can get a copy, or you can contact me and I'll give you a copy of my story.
Too many wires back that way. Well, excellent. Congratulations, Alban. Very, very. He also has a poem kind of a musing poem in a narrative poem in our anthology as well, Menagerie. So congratulations again. Anyone else with an announcement? Project starts, stops, decide to give up writing? Just anything that you want to announce? Okay, well, if we're done with that, then we will move on to our guest speaker, Jonathan Maberry. And, oh, I probably should get the bio. I know a lot about you, but I forgot to bring the bio. Well, I'll just wing it then. Jonathan Maberry is a New York Times bestselling author and 5-time Bram Stoker Award-winning author as well. He's had everything from weird science techno-thrillers series, Joe Ledger, to young adult zombie features, the V-Wars that was made into a Netflix series, and currently they're shopping Joe Ledger series for television with the director of the John Wick series. So he's had a little bit of success in writing. He's been doing this a while. And my friend and a wonderful human being, Jonathan Maberry.
Hey guys. All right. Let's make sure that I'm by the mic and in front of the. All right. Hi. So we're going to be talking about world building, which is one of my favorite subjects, and it's also a wildly misunderstood and underappreciated writing skill. World building is not just creating fantasy worlds or alien worlds. World building is making the location of your story as important as any character in that story. There are writers who have done this beautifully. John D. MacDonald with his South Florida novels, the Travis McGee novels. Tony Hillerman with his stories set on the Navajo reservation, and so on. Walter Mosley in the 1960s and 70s and 80s version of Los Angeles. It's when you look at the real world and want to put a version of it in a book, you are creating a new version of that world. You are doing world building. If you ignore it, what happens is you rely solely on the characters and the events, but it doesn't get that same sense of place. It doesn't get that same richness of background. On the way up here, I was listening to the latest James Lee Burke, Dave Robichaux novel. If you ever read those, they're all set in and around New Orleans. And there are so many different moments where he'll mention a character or a thing or a historical moment or a tradition that is particular to that area. And, we usually catch little tiny glimpses of different parts of the country, different parts of the world. So it kind of resonates a little with us. So by bringing in some of these details, he not only allows us to access bits of memory that, again, tie us to the story, but then he enriches us with it. He finds that moment and then gives us a little more, whether it's talking about the corruption in New Orleans and he'll talk with the politicians, or the history with slavery. He'll bring that up and a lot of the issues that go along with trying to wrestle with being in the 21st century and not being a total jerk. There's a lot of things that are in there. And also some of the wonderful traditions, the music traditions and so on. Those little elements put me in New Orleans. And I've been there. And going back to New Orleans, having read his books, it becomes a more interesting and to a degree more magical place. So when we sit down to place our story, often we ignore the world building part of it, the location scouting and so on. I want to start with the easy stuff and then go into the fantasy stuff. So when in my Joe Ledger thrillers, I'm midway through. This is my 15th. It just came out last week. I'm in the middle of writing the 16th in the series. Now it takes place in different places all over the world, and right now, like the current one I'm writing, takes place in Eastern Europe. So I've done a lot of research about Eastern Europe, making sure that I understand the differences between, say, Moldova and Romania and Ukraine and so on. They're all neighboring countries. Borders have shifted a lot over the last couple of thousand years, and cultures have clashed in interesting ways. And also they've all been under the shadow of Russia, especially during the Cold War. All of those things create a sense of the place. But what most of us have seen of Eastern Europe, looks always cold and gray and so on. And I understand a lot of those versions of it were what we saw during the Cold War going back to shows like I Spy and James Bond and so on, where everything, they use sepia tones or gray tones even when shooting them for film and TV. But if you've ever been there or ever looked at the place, there's so much rampant beauty there. And that doesn't get talked about. And as a result, what we have is a distorted version of it. That's their world building politically from the Cold War. This is not the Cold War anymore. Granted, there are different wars going on right now, but the people in Ukraine, the people in Moldova and Romania are no longer part of the communist world, and they have more freedom, more artistic expression, which is represented in the art, the styles, the music, and so on. Taking little elements of that, looking like, if you're about to write a scene set in Romania, look up who are the most popular pop bands right now, or whatever kind of music you listen to, bands right now. Have that on the radio. Have somebody turn on the radio and that's playing. Stop, if they're going to stop for a meal or stop for a night, do a search and find out what the hotels are in that area, where the gas stations are in that area. Use those real things. Now, part of world building in the real world relies on something that I've always thought was a great tool for writers. It starts with, and something Richard Matheson told me when I was a kid, starts with this old con man saying, use 9 truths to sell 1 lie. Essentially what you're doing is you're building your story on a scaffold of reality. If somebody buys a soda, it's a Coke, or it's some other brand that really exists. If they're driving a car, it's the car most common to that area. Like if I was doing it, I did something for somebody was driving an SUV the other day in my story. So I looked up most popular SUV brands in Moldova. Turns out Black Dacias are the most common SUV. So that's what my character's driving. Those elements do a couple of things. One, they help the reader understand that this is a world that you as the writer know. Even if it's from research, it doesn't matter. You know it enough to be able to write about it realistically. And that allows them to buy it and buy its reality. They're able to accept its reality as reality. And the reality, since it's the real world that you're using as your basis for this world building, the story then is set in the real world. And that allows suspension of disbelief more comfortably and more completely than if you just try to have characters be earnest enough to get that. The place is one of the things that sets suspension of disbelief. It sets reality into the story. And little things like if in this scene I wrote 2 days ago, 2 characters were going to a restaurant in a particular city. I looked up restaurants in that area and went to their websites, found their restaurant menus from the websites, and they ordered off the menu. I've done that for books in the past where people say, "Oh my God, I went to that same restaurant you were at in Greece or wherever." And because Joe and Junie, the 2 characters, had that special breakfast up on the deck, I had it too. It was great. When were you there? And I'm like, I was never there. I just do good research. And that is actually the case. You can do good research. I can read restaurant reviews of that place and get a sense of what people, travelers said about it, and include maybe some element of that in there to, again, give it that dimension, that reality. You don't have to get permission, by the way, to do that sort of thing. I don't have to get permission from the restaurant. I don't have to get permission to use the word Coke or Coca-Cola. If somebody's getting a cup of Starbucks, which somebody got me here and is now in my cup, thank you. I don't have to get permission from Starbucks. You can, if it's in the real world, you can mention it in the real world. You can mention real people, real places, real music on the radio, real food, real cars. All of that builds the reality of the story. And world building is at its best when there are things that any reader can find in the book and say, "Oh yeah," or "I understand that," or they get it. In science fiction, for example, like right now we just had Project Hail Mary come out, big science fiction film, Andy Weir's latest. My buddy, my audiobook reader read the audiobook of it, and it's great. But the thing about Andy Weir is he spends a lot of time researching the science of what he's writing about. Now, mind you, not all the science makes it to the movie, but a lot of it's in the book. and that science is rock solid. He talks to scientists. He makes sure, he's talked to astronauts. He's been to the Jet Propulsion Lab and the space centers in Texas and other places to get not only reliable information, but current reliable information. Because if you're talking to an expert at one of these places, they're going to be talking about what they're doing now. By the time that gets into the popular press, will be like maybe a year or so. Well, that's about when the book will be out too. So the book looks wildly prescient. And a good example of this in world building, since I use a lot of, I write, my Joe Ledger thriller series often deals with bioweapons of one kind or another. I talk to a lot of scientists. One of my friends, Ronald Coleman, is a molecular biologist, stem cell scientist, brilliant, brilliant guy. And if I ask him about a disease form or something that's going on, or just simply ask him what's going on in your field of science that we don't know about yet, they'll give me information. And I've been doing this with all my experts. Well, some years ago, John Smar, another one of my infectious disease experts, reached out to me and said, hey, it's an awful disease. Now, side note, sometimes experts are really excited about something that the rest of us are appalled about. So a new disease is really exciting for them, despite the fact that it's killing people. The scientist part and the humanist is probably sitting at home. So he said, there's this terrible new disease coming out that is we've seen it down in Mexico, Central America, and a little bit in South America too, and it's probably going to hit America in the next couple of years. It's called Zika, and it's dreadful, and we're just now figuring out its spread patterns and all of that about it. And he said, you should put that in one of your books. Now, I didn't write a book about Zika, but I was writing a book about plagues, and Zika was a factor in it, was mentioned in it. My book came out 4 days after Zika hit the news in the United States, because I had talked to a scientist and asked him, what's the newest, weirdest thing happening in your field? That makes the writer look very prescient. And it's not that we are, though that would be useful, it's that we do our homework. When in the 60s and 70s, when I was growing up, they were reprinting all the old pulps, the Shadow and Doc Savage and all those, 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s pulps. And the character of Doc Savage was a scientist, and he always had these cool gadgets. Now, mind you, these books were written in the 30s. So he was the author who wrote most of the books under the house name of Kenneth Robeson, Lester Dent, was a science junkie. He would read every science magazine he could. He talked to scientists because he wanted his character to have cutting edge stuff. And some of the things that he had in 1934 when the series started, like a plane that flew 500 miles an hour. In 1934, we didn't have anything that could do that. Now, that's old hat. But in 1934, that was crazy. And then later on, when we started having planes that could fly that fast, people look back and say, how did he know? Well, part of it is prediction. You think, well, okay, if this is what we have now, what's next? When they were doing Star Trek, they came up with the communicator. The communicator on Star Trek, by the way, which is now way surpassed by these, was the inspiration for these. It actually was the inspiration because it was a practical device that once we got to a certain level of technology, we could do this, and that would become popular. Personal computers, I saw them in science fiction stories for years, and then I remember when the Commodore 64 came out. I was so excited. I could have my own computer. Wow. Pocket calculator came out when I was in high school. It was new. But I had seen pocket calculators and personal computers and so on in science fiction. Because writers, we should be filling our brains with as much information as possible so that we can create believable worlds, and also to be as predictive as possible so that our books have a longer shelf life than, a couple of months or a year. We want the book to have somewhat of an evergreen feeling. And when we can build into that world, the world of that story, elements of what is in development and what is to come, that really works well. It helps establish that. And also, I do some research, quite a bit of research, with a group called DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration. It's basically the group of science geeks that work for the Department of Military. A Department of whatever they're calling it these days. No, it's not. And those guys are working on stuff that we won't see in the public for years. Sometimes they'll let a researcher see it, sometimes not. but they do like showing off a bit. I'll go to any kind of a lab or any kind of an organization, and again, you ask that, what don't I know enough about your field to even ask? What are the most popular misconceptions about your field? And what's the coolest thing happening right now? Ask those kinds of questions. They will go out of their way to show off. They love showing their technology and the fact that they have it, nobody else has it. And if you can take that and get those guys to be experts that will answer some of your questions, and you put it in your work is then on the leading edge. And the world within that work suddenly becomes real with a twist. And real with a twist is kind of where I like to go with this stuff. In other kinds of science fiction, like with The Martian, you had him trying to figure out how to stay alive on Mars, dealing with a lot of the threats that most people don't realize are there. Everything is radioactive on Mars. It's cold on Mars. The sun is weaker on Mars, which takes longer for solar panels to recharge. All of those things, he mentioned those little extra details. Like, we knew they had solar panels to recharge their vehicles and stuff on, for the robots that go around Mars currently. So what we didn't know, and was never a factor, was how quickly those solar panels charge and how quickly they lose their energy. And that was a big part of The Martian, of him going across a big part of Mars to get somewhere else, is those solar panels and dust storms and other things. And that was by talking to real scientists. And what it did, it made the version of Mars in The Martian absolutely real. Now, even though this is more fantasy than science fiction, I'm sure you guys have all seen Star Wars. I'm talking about the first one, A New Hope, the original Star Wars film. Do you know why that worked? One of the reasons that worked so well with people, why people bought into that world so well? Everything was dusty, rusty, beat up, and lived in. It looked like it had always been there. In other science fiction films, everything is shiny silver metal. That's not how it would work, especially it's on a desert planet, for God's sake. So the fact that he had a junk room filled with a bunch of stuff, including, you would see in the back his speeder, which looked like it was 200 years old, was so battered. What we see is not only the reality of that moment that they're trying to sell to us, we're seeing that moment is in a real span of time. It has existed before the story. It will exist after the story. That permanence gives the world a sense of reality. Some of the best Westerns are not the ones where everybody's looking really clean after being on the prairie on a horse all day long. They come into town, everything's, No, you look and smell horrible after a day on the prairie with the cows. And when you come into town, you are tramping dust and horse dung and everything else around. One of the first films to really go there was Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood. It was a dirty, unpleasant, lived-in version of the Old West that was accurate to the Old West. It kind of erased a lot of the stuff that you saw in the Hopalong Cassidy and Roy Rogers films. It made it a real place, and an unpleasant place. And if it's unpleasant, that means there are challenges all the time. And if there are challenges, that is story tension, that is suspense. That's what makes the characters earn their way through the story and makes the lead character earn his or her way to being protagonist. That reality, the dust, the rust, and the dents. Look for places to put lived in your story. And don't feel that you need to pause to explain everything. Somebody could pick up a triple left adjustable spanner. There is no such thing. But if somebody picks one up and is using it, we now accept that is a real thing. But if you pause to describe it, the reader becomes completely aware that it's not a real thing. Now, there are some things, of course, you have to describe. But everyday objects there should be as normal here. Because if somebody in a contemporary novel picks up a wrench, you don't get half a page description of what a wrench is and how it's used. Nor do you need it. You accept that it's a wrench. One of the easiest ways in any kind of fiction to build the world, let me back up for a second. A lot of people think you have to write pretty much a book about this big of just backstory on your world before you write your novel. You do not. There are some things you will do, and I'll get to those in a bit. But one of the things that really helps you decide what the world is and what needs to be said about it is what I call a day in the life approach. So I have this series called The Rotten Ruin. It's 7 books set in post-apocalyptic California, Central California, 30 years after the zombie apocalypse, or 15 years after the zombie apocalypse, rather. And, you know, the world has been destroyed. There are a few fenced-in towns in Central California, and that's, as far as I know, all there is. Everything else is the zombie apocalypse. The story opens not by giving a history of the zombie apocalypse, but by 2 15-year-old kids who have to get a job because with you know, tight rations, if you don't get a job and you're not part of the productive community, you get your rations cut in half. So they have to get jobs at 15. That's the rules. The jobs they go looking for, as these 2 friends are going looking for jobs, are the kind of jobs that would only exist in a post-apocalyptic, post-zombie apocalyptic California. Now, that is world building. So at one point, they're applying for a job to sell carpet coats. Carpet coats, if all of you guys are into zombie movies at all, zombies are rotting humans. They're not stronger than humans, and even their dental ligatures are beginning to rot. They're weaker. Their strength is in numbers. So since none of us could, if we pulled up this all-weather carpet, you know, that we have here, none of us could bite through it. Well, zombie's not going to bite through it either. So there's carpet everywhere. So if you're trying to survive, it would make sense to tear up carpet and wrap it around yourself and not get bitten or not have the bite go through it. Somebody back then figured it out to the point where now carpet coats are a thing that are sold routinely. So we don't need to go into the history of carpet coats. We just know that these carpet coats, and to just give a little tie into the reason for them, one of the jobs that Benny, the main character, is trying is he has a device called a biter. So he wears the carpet coat, and the salesman shows how this biter thing, it's kind of like those grabbers use, but it's teeth, can't bite through the coat. It still hurts, pinches, but he's part of that. Now, we get the demonstration is selling not only the solution, but the history of the solution. That business does not exist in any version of our world. It exists only in that world. But because it is a commonplace thing that even a kid can go get a job doing, it's easy to buy. It's easy to accept. There's another job called fence tester, where basically you're walking along this huge fence around the city, testing it to make sure that it's strong. And the zombies, of course, try to bite you. So you have to do it quick. You have to rattle the fence and get away from it. Zombies will come here and then go there and try another piece of fence. Again, we can see that as a practical thing. There are people who, on large ranches and so on, where they have fences, there are people who go out and test the fences. That's one of the jobs that happens in farming and ranching. This is just transferred to a new type of thing. Instead of trying to keep your animals from getting out, you're trying to keep monsters from getting in. And there are other jobs that they find. Pit thrower. Kill a zombie, you got to burn it. So somebody has to, when the scouts go out and bring the zombies in, somebody has to throw those bodies into the pit. And that was one of the jobs. All of the jobs are awful, by the way, because they're the lowest level of jobs, because generally we don't have high executive positions for 15-year-olds. We want them, I've done a lot of terrible jobs when I was younger, and let's just say I'm glad between education and career success, I'm no longer doing those kinds of jobs, but I've had some terrible jobs. Those jobs were common to the neighborhood I grew up in, bouncer in a bar. Very common to the neighborhood I grew up in, where you had bars on every corner. So if I was writing about 1985 Kensington, the neighborhood in Philadelphia, the worst neighborhood in Philadelphia, actually literally is the worst neighborhood in Philadelphia. You can look it up. There were bars on every corner. I got a job as a bouncer in a strip club in my neighborhood because I was big, I was tough, and I had no real work experience that would get me any better job. So that's what I did for 5 years. I beat up people who thought that the dancers, because they were dancing, were inviting to be touched, and I disabused them of that notion. It is a terrible job. It will actually form the basis of the job for a character in the very next novel I'm writing, because that's his job. And it's the kind of job that erodes you. So if you want to have a character with, say, an emotional challenge, put them in a real job that is emotionally draining or emotionally embarrassing or something. Let the job and and the fact that it exists in this place, in this world, be the reason that, that his depression or his anxiety is being fueled. The setting sells that. Now, as I said, I worked for 5 years in a strip club. I actually don't like strip dancing. I never have. I'm embarrassed for the dancer. I'm embarrassed for the guys watching. It just feels creepy to me. But at the same time, the women were being abused, and I grew up with 4 sisters, and we were all abused kids. So I was there to protect the dancers. It is the only reason I was there. And I was there for years. We were fighting 4 or 5 times a week, every week for 5 years. It was a terrible, terrible job. The result of it is I have scars physically and emotionally from that. I know people who work there as dancers who are now, family people, and, the kids don't know that's what they did, but they do. And so every once in a while, they're afraid of running into somebody who remembers them from those days. All of those things, people who maybe got thrown out. I actually ran into a guy that I put in the hospital when I was working there. And he actually thanked me because he said he was going through a bad time and he was taking that on people. And I stopped him in his tracks doing it. Now, all of those stories are tied to that bar in that place, in that city, in that neighborhood of that city. That's a real place. I can tell as many fantastical stories as I want. In fact, the novel I'll be writing is an urban fantasy novel, but it's going to start in that place, in the real world, a dead-end corner of the real world, and then go from there. So it's up to me to make sure that I do a 2026 version of the bar I worked in 1985. I need to update a little bit, but also carry with it the same sadness and the same social distress and the same sexism and misogyny and all the other things that went into that environment, and I have to update them. That puts it in the real world because those bars like that still exist. And that bar I worked in still exists. It's been there since 1962. Imagine that being your family legacy. Someday, son, you'll grow up and this will be yours. Now, when you go outside of our world and you want to create a more fantastical setting, we have a lot of examples of how this is done. We have Lord of the Rings, the most famous fantasy series of all time. Now, little side note, how many of you have read Lord of the Rings? Okay. I'm sure most of you have seen the movies. Those books would never sell today. No, if they were pitched to an agent would never take those books on. Anybody have a guess as to why? Okay, trick question. They actually take too long to get anywhere. They start, like Fellowship of the Ring starts with this long section about a party that has no relevance to anything that will happen. The events of Frodo and Bilbo and Gandalf and the Ring all matter, but they're buried in about 80 pages of stuff. We don't need that stuff. Now, the writer, if he was writing now, would have been encouraged to, if you want to write about the Shire, have Frodo or Bilbo getting ready to do the party, but have them going around to different places in the Shire, buying supplies or dealing with vendors or whatever. That would give a sense of the Shire. You don't need all those 80 pages of the party. But you do need to establish that the Shire is a real place. The Hobbit hole, when it's described, is great. That's the sort of stuff you can stick in there. So a house built into, a hill isn't something completely alien to our world. We have those. There are some famous architects who have built those. And right now there's this movement of houses that are self-insulated by dirt, by building them under, ground with an exterior opening, but letting the earth itself be its insulation and protection. So we have that sort of stuff. It's easy to imagine that. That's not extraordinary. Except for a few examples, a lot of the trees and plants mentioned in Lord of the Rings are real. There's oak, there's elm, and so on. Some writers feel that it's their job in a fantasy world to give everything a fantasy name. Oh, for the love of God, please don't do that. First off, I'm friends with a lot of audiobook readers. They hate that when everything has a fantasy name. You don't need to have every tree in the forest, not only with a fantasy name, but actually named in the book. You don't. The readers are never going to remember that stuff. It is more important to have a special thing with a special name. In Lord of the Rings, the plant Athelas, Kingsfoil, the one that Aragorn uses to help save Frodo's life after he was stabbed with the Morgul blade. Now, they mention a bunch of other plants and stuff during those long passages of them walking through the forest, which again, you don't need in a modern contemporary book. But Athelas is its own invention for that book. And as a result, here I am remembering the name Athelas. Whereas if it was one of 70 fantasy names for things, I probably wouldn't be able to pull it out of my head. And that's how world building should work in fantasy. Choose your moments to give something a fantasy world, a fantasy name. And as often as you can, don't. I did one epic fantasy series, a trilogy called Kagan the Damned. And it's set 50,000 years from now, after our society has completely crumbled down to barbarism, and we clawed our way back up to approximately the level of ancient Rome, cultural-wise. I did not rename everything, even though nobody in this 50,000 year from now future world is speaking English or any other known language. I don't have to give them accents. I don't have to create a whole bunch of new words. If somebody's looking at a tree, that's an oak tree. The species of tree matters in that I can recognize it as a tree. When they say an oak tree, I know it's a tree. I have seen oak trees. I can fill in the blank for what that looks like. Or the elm tree in The Hobbit. I can figure that out, see what it looks like. All of these, that kind of thing is grounding it again in real world. It's that same scaffolding of 90% reality. Save your moment for the fantasy stuff for when you need fantasy stuff. So with Kagan, instead of opening the book with a history of, the Western empires and the Silver Empire, which is the main one that's overthrown, I don't need a history of the Silver Empire on page 1. My page 1 starts with, I think the entire first chapter is, Kagan Vale woke to the sound of his own damnation. That's the entire chapter 1. Now, what that says is, we know the character's name, and we know there's trouble. And it's particularly trouble that's going to screw his life up. All we know, we don't need anything else to know about that world to get past the first chapter. Second chapter, he's waking up, and he's waking up normally. Mind you, he's waking up from having been drugged, but still, it's a human being waking up in a bed, having had a bad night, and becoming gradually aware that there's something bad going on. As his senses are, kind of waking up with him, he hears, screams and the clash of swords, and looks out the window and sees fire. All of that still are things, those are all things we know. We know what screams sound like. We know what clash of blade on blade is going to sound like. We've seen enough movies if you haven't been in Society of Creative Anachronisms or other groups. And we know what it's like to shake off a hard night's or a bad night's sleep. I'm continuing to use the real world to establish a sense of comfort and a sense of understanding, because as the story goes on, we're going to be hitting the reader with new stuff. Soon will be, it'll be mentioned, the Silver Empire. He's a guard in the palace in the capital city. There's, the Empress, his job is to protect the royal children, the imperial children rather. So now we're starting to get into the elements that make up the societal structure of the new book, of the new world. But again, we're not overloading the reader with stuff they have to remember. We need them to experience. We need them to bond with the character through his experience of having a really bad morning and finding out it's much worse than he thinks it is. All of those things are the commonplace ways of getting the reader standing right next to us as this is happening. I don't get into the fantasy elements really until, I do it small. Like, have you guys ever heard of Greek fire? So for those who haven't, it was a chemical combination that was concocted, thousands of years ago that burned really, intensely. They made a version of it for Game of Thrones. In fact, George R.R. Martin and I talked about this. He used the thing that Tyrion uses to save King's Landing, that explosion, and then later on, Cersei uses to blow up that cult that's trying to dominate her. That's based on Greek fire. So he, again, is taking something from the real world and just bending it a little bit to the needs of his story, as I did with Bane fire in my story. And there was something called Bane fire years ago. So then we find out that there's magic in the world. And that is a soft entry into it. A soft entry is when you don't give them a lot of backstory on something. Magic exists. Magic was outlawed 1,000 years ago, and magic is coming back. And the way Kagan realizes that magic is coming back is because an entire fleet showed up in the bay right outside this capital city all at once. They came out of nowhere, and suddenly that fleet is there. And troops appeared in the cities all at once. It's like they had some sort of magic portal or spell or something. So now the character's becoming aware that there's magic. Do I pause to give the entire backstory of the magic system? I do not. Not then, not ever. Because it doesn't matter to give every single detail. It matters to give the details that are necessary in the moment for the reader to understand what's happening. And to give just enough clarity on that so they retain awareness of that, so they will be able to recognize it later on. And if they recognize it later on, it means that it's become part of the world that they recognize. They're now recognizing this world. Later on, I could use, I could expand on it in different ways. But again, as the character experiences it. So Kagan gets, he fails in his duty. His job was to protect the imperial children. He was drugged. So, and we find out that later on, he couldn't have gotten there in time to save them. When he gets there, they're all dead. The Empress is dead. His mother and father are dead. His older brother are dead. All the people that he cares about have died. He feels like the most complete failure. And when he finally escapes and goes out into this raging storm and collapses, he sees the gods of the harvest. This is where we introduce the religion. It's the harvest gods. He imagines seeing mother and father, those two gods in the sky, and they turn their back on him and walk away. He feels that he's been abandoned, he's been damned, hence the title of the book, by the gods because of his failure. At no point do I need to go into the commandments of that religion, its precepts, or anything else. Gods, we know what gods are. They abandon him. He feels damned. We know what damnation is. They're real-world elements applied to fantasy and applied to fantastical situations. We don't yet know why they damned him, if he's truly damned, or what that will mean, what that will imply. Now, because he believes he's damned, and may actually be, I never completely say so, certain magical creatures that are now re-emerging into this world have no power over him, or less power over him. Or, in the third book, of one group of forest elves, a very primitive group, recognize him as having been touched by the gods, and they won't kill him because they're afraid of offending the gods. Now, there are plenty of earth religions where that's happened, where you have someone in several Native American indigenous cultures. There's a belief that somebody who is what we might call crazy, psychologically impaired, is actually, they say, touched by the gods, and what they're saying or how they act is reflective of what they're seeing. Celestial visions. We may never know what they see. We don't need to know what they see. All we need to know is they're touched by the gods, and therefore we can't hurt them. Probably 1,000 cultures in our own history have had some variation of that. So use that as a fantasy thing where we have elves not sacrificing a human because he's touched by gods. The framework of the belief system, that fragment of belief system, is what I implant into the new world, and it makes the fantasy elements have a sense of, it makes them logical. They seem to make sense. And by the way, little pause. You guys can ask questions anywhere, at any time during this. So if you have specific types of world building questions, don't hesitate to ask.
So that being said, does anyone have any questions either on Zoom
All right.
or in the room? Go
Angie?
ahead. Angie, you're going to need to go to the mic at the podium so that the people on Zoom can hear.
Or I can repeat the question too.
I was intrigued by what you said about not having to have permission to reference things in the real world. Now, if you wanted to reference characters in other people's worlds, you know, Tolkien or whomever, would you need to get permission? So for example, if I was going to have my character, a character that is original to me, ask Frodo what his favorite drink at Starbucks is now because he's working as a barista at Starbucks, do I need to get permission for that?
It's a little bit of a gray area there. I've put real people in my books quite a lot, and I usually ask them ahead of time. I don't always. In one of my novels, I had there was a terrorist attack on a cruise ship, and there was a lot of celebrities there, and one of them was Bono, and he was on the plane going back with the hero, and you know they had a cup of tea together on the plane. I didn't need Bono's permission for that. If I had made Bono do something outside of what is perceived to be his character, like if he was one of the terrorists, yeah, I'd need permission for that. I'd probably get rejected.
Mm-hmm.
But to have him just as a celebrity, because that's what he is, doing celebrity things, and then having conversation, I didn't need permission for that.
Interesting. Well, what I'm referring to is fictional characters.
Now, in fiction, if it's under copyright, yes, if you can refer to them, like somebody can be reading things, but if they're actually interacting with main characters and it's still under copyright, you need permission from the license holder.
Gotcha.
Now, there's a way around it. You could have a barista with a tag Frodo, and you know he's looking, you know, he's really short, and you're like, well, that's weird. See, you're not saying it is Frodo, but we all know it is Frodo. It's just a weird moment.
I see. So it can't be quite too on the nose about it.
Can't be too on the nose. Or you could have, if you go to Ren Fair and you have a guy playing Frodo, and you notice as he's walking away, he has 9 fingers instead of 10. Well, Frodo lost a finger in The Lord of the Rings, and you're like, wait a minute, because he's playing Frodo at a fair, which means he's playing a character, but it could actually be Frodo, and you're just not sure. Being definite about it, you have to be a little more careful about that.
Interesting. Thank you very much.
Sure. A friend of mine had written a story once where he brought in a couple of characters from his favorite novel series, and there was some pushback on that. Now, in my Joe Ledger series, I often name check the characters from James Rollins' Sigma Force series, Jeremy Robinson's chess team, Larry Correa's Monster Hunter International. I'll mention them as other teams active in the world right now, but I did ask the writers for permission. And my characters have been used in quite a few projects. Now, there is something called media tie-in writing, a little thing about that. That is when you are writing in someone else's licensed world. It's not fan fiction. Fan fiction is when you're doing it, but you cannot sell it. You can publish it, but you can't sell it. Because it's somebody else's licensing thing, and fan fiction, is non-fiduciary. So, if I wanted to write a story with Frodo, I would have to find out who holds the prose rights to it. Sometimes it's the estate. Sometimes it might be the book publisher. Probably not in Lord of the Rings because there hasn't been a lot of fan fiction. There hasn't been a lot of additional fiction written in that, even though there are additional stories on TV. So what you would have to do is you contact the person. Believe it or not, one of the easiest ways to do that is Wikipedia. It often shows who owns it, and if not, IMDb or IMDb Pro, Internet Movie Database Pro, gives you all of the information of everyone who's involved in it and their contact information, and you can always write for that. I did that. I wanted to do an anthology of stories set in the world of aliens, and I wrote to Fox, and found out that Titan had the prose rights, but I still had to go to Fox, and then I was able to do an anthology of that. So that's writing in someone else's world. And to a degree, that actually does tie into this, because you're writing in somebody else's established world. If I'm going to write an alien story, or a Hellboy story, or a True Blood story, all of which I have done, or Planet of the Apes, I have to get permission. and I need to read the source material to make sure that I am honoring the original version of it and not changing things. I was in an anthology some years ago set in the land of Oz. Now, the first few Oz books are actually in public. Actually, the first, I think all the L. Frank Baum books are now in public domain. So anybody can write an Oz story. But when I was doing this, only the first 3 Oz books were in public domain. And I wanted to make sure that I wrote a story that was in harmony with those 3 books. A lot of the other writers took it as a challenge to, let me go in there and completely tear down what we know about Oz and rebuild it in a new image. And you see a lot of that stuff. I mean, there's every couple of years, there's a new Oz, new version of Oz, or new version of Alice in Wonderland in some film, whether it's fantasy, science fiction, contemporary drama, and so on. They like to reimagine it. I actually don't. I want to write in that world. I want to read that world and re-experience that world so that I can then pick out details and write about it. So when I was doing the Oz books, Oz story, I reread the first 3 Oz books and also reread some of the others, but I wanted to make sure that in my version of it, in the book version, they're silver slippers, not ruby slippers. In the book version of it, Toto's a different breed of dog. In the book version of it, the flying monkeys are not mute creatures. They are an actual race, an intelligent race who were enslaved by the witch, which tells a completely different story. They have their own culture, but they're by the time of Dorothy, they're under the oppression of the witch. So I thought, well, why don't I go back a little bit and tell a story about the flying monkeys before that? So I wrote a story about a little flying monkey girl whose wings are too small for her to fly, and she wants to find magic traveling shoes that would take her to all the places her wings can't. I reread those books. I looked at the maps of Oz so I can set it in the right places. I made sure I knew who was ruling Oz at the time, which witches were in play at the time, and everything. I got all of it from the book. The book was my guide to writing in that world. The books were my guide to writing in that world, so that I didn't change the world. I enhanced the experience for anyone who knows the world, even crossing the endless desert and so on. That story, because I did my homework and I set it firmly in the existing world of Oz, just changed a little bit about what we know about the origin of the magic shoes, because those shoes became the silver slippers. She found dragon scales that were able to repair the shoes and restore their magic. I wound up getting contacted by the estate of L. Frank Baum. And at first I thought, oh crap, I'm going to get fried. Turns out, of all the stories in the anthology, they thought that one is the one that honored the legacy of Oz the most. It felt like it was written by the creator of Oz, and they added it to the official chronology of Oz. It is now and forever a prequel to The Wizard of Oz. That's what happens when a writer does their homework and honors the source material, not takes it as an opportunity to come in and just completely rewrite it. That's media tie-in stuff. And by the way, great area to be in. I'm president now of the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. So it's an area I've written in a lot of fantasy worlds. Some of my own books, this series, for example, I've done 2 anthologies inviting other writers to write stories in that world. And that's now its own license because it's going to go to TV and so on. When you're creating a world for a fantasy setting, fantasy is one of the 2 areas where you are challenged the most to write, to understand how people acquire information and what their potential for retention of information might be. So, has anybody here ever read any of the Bernard Cornwell novels, the Sharp series? Okay, so there are like 30 books in the series. He's done prequels and sequels and everything else. Sean Bean did 10 movies based on the Sharp series. If you like Sean Bean, yes, he's done 10 movies based on the Sharp series. Great. That series is set during the Peninsular War, leading up to Waterloo and then going beyond it. Actually, he's written prequels starting in India with the British Army in India. He did enormous research. And if somebody goes into a city or town in that book, that town exists. In fact, you can use his books as a tour guide to go and tour Spain, Portugal, or Portugal, Spain, and France, because the roads the soldiers followed are the roads that a historian would follow to be able to examine and chronicle that era of history. The Sharp novels what he does is he takes real events. Historical fiction is one of the two areas that really is challenging. He takes real events and he gives you this much of it, and this much of it is fiction. But everything else is real. He's still writing the books. He reads diaries from officers who are in the army on both sides. Actually, on multiple sides, because it wasn't just France and England. Portugal was involved, and Poland was involved, and a bunch of other places were involved in that war. He reads their diaries. He reads historical accounts. He goes to places when he can, and tries to feel what it's like to have been there 200 years ago. That's what he does. And at the end of each book, he'll put a historical note explaining where he what the real history was and what he bent about real history. That allows me to pick up any new Bernard Cornwell book, whether it's that series or his Civil War series or his series about, potentially the basis for the legend of King Arthur, who by the way, was probably not a real person, or if he was a fairly primitive warlord. But he writes about it because he's a scholar of history. He's an amateur scholar of history. He uses that 90% framework to give us comfort, so we don't need to wonder if he's mangling history. We're now buying into the fact that Richard Sharp and his company of riflemen were there. It seems like, how could this battle have been fought without them? We buy into so much, the reality so strongly, and that's great. That's what really makes those types of stories work. Anybody ever read any of the Patrick O'Brien sea stories? Captain Aubrey and Dr. Maturin? 21 of those? Not a lot of historical fiction fans here, huh? Considered to be the most accurate series of historical naval novels.
Is that the Master and Commander stuff?
Yeah, Master and Commander.
Yeah.
They made a movie.
Yeah, I read it.
Great series of books. What he did is he read diaries. Sea captains, pursers, and officers and doctors always kept diaries and journals. There are libraries full of this stuff. He would go and read it so that he would get it right. People who the screenwriter who wrote the script for the Patton movie went and actually, interview people in Patton circles, families, survivors from those battles and so on, so that lines of dialogue are real lines, real things people said. Most of it, not all of it. You can't write a historical novel and get everybody's lines completely right. Which, by the way, a friend of mine is a Bible scholar, and he argues about in biblical interpretations, Old Testament, New Testament, other cultures' Bibles, religious texts. Nobody actually knows what was said back then, because the Bible, the Gospels were written 40 to 90 years after the death of Jesus. So they're writing a type of historical fiction, well-intentioned to be sure, but they don't actually know what he said. And Mark and John or Matthew and Luke contradict each other in phrasing, but it doesn't matter. The essence comes across of what's being said, and that's what matters. There was a great Civil War novel, The Killer Angels. Fantastic one. The amount of research he did was amazing, and yet all of the dialogue, except what was lifted from correspondence, and sometimes that correspondence becomes a line somebody can say, all the dialogue was made up, but it was made up according to the historical depth of his research. I mean, he went and found the information, and then again, bent it to the will of his story, bent it to the needs of the story. In fantasy worlds, writing a fantasy story is not that difficult or not that different from writing historical fiction, because you're writing about a place and time the reader may not be personally aware of. Now, in historical fiction, you have the one added benefit of people, it's a real thing, and a lot of times people have experienced elements of it, through schooling or readings they've chosen to do, and that's why they're reading the historical fiction. But not everybody has had that background who reads historical fiction. In fantasy, of course, they have not been to this fantasy world before, unless there's something about your fantasy world you don't know. But they've read enough fantasy. Most people have read some kind of fantasy. Most people who read a book have read that genre before. And if you're leaning into the structure of good storytelling without over-explaining, but still making sure those elements that define it as fantasy are available, it feels like it's another part of the extended universe of Oz and Narnia and Middle Earth and the Seven Kingdoms and so on, because they all are grounded in a degree of reality as well. The stories that I can't off the top of my head name are the ones that left me feeling that this person was just showing off by how many weird things he can come up with and basically naming characters by randomly grabbing tiles out of a Scrabble bag. I don't like that kind of fiction. There are some writers who appeal to a portion of the reading demographic, and sometimes it's a big chunk, who actually go whole hog with world building. They'll say, they'll look at Tolkien with all the extraneous stuff that would be cut out of modern editions, and they'll say, hold my beer. And then they'll go and they'll, give you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. Robert Jordan. I know The Wheel of Time is enormously popular, but if I was editing that book, there are about 400 pages of every volume that would just go. You do not need 3 pages describing the leaves on a tree. It's as annoying as some of literary fiction where they forget that you need a plot and just simply rely on description. No, give us a story. Remember, there are people in the story. Those people in the story live in a real place to them, place that is actually real to them. So therefore, quote unquote, write about it as if it's a real place. If I go to, last country I traveled to was Italy, right? When I arrived in Lucca, it's a small town in Tuscany, they gave me a translator and a driver. I was there for a book thing. Neither the translator nor the driver felt compelled to tell me the entire history of the town. They told me a few cool things, like the fact that Lucca was one of the few towns in Italy never conquered in any war. Cool. That the cobbles on the streets were laid down by the Romans. The wall was built in the 10th century, 12th century, 30-foot wide wall. And it's where the rich families lived. That's why there are 90 churches in this small town, 90 huge churches, because that's where the rich families lived, and each family had their own church, because they patronized that church. That's the sort of stuff I got. The fact that there's a restaurant that's in Puccini's house. That became a must-do destination. But there's a lot of Tuscan history they did not tell me. A lot of Lucca history they didn't tell me because it didn't matter in that moment. If I was interested enough to go to Lucca, they would assume I would ask the questions for the information that I wanted to know. And in fact, I had questions. My wife had questions. We asked them about certain things. That's when the extra details happen. So that's kind of ties into my day in the life thing. I'm going to Lucca for a Comic-Con, 500,000 person Comic-Con. And I was, my focus was on the pop culture and my bookstore appearances and school appearances I was going to do. I didn't need the entire history of the town to enjoy my experience in that town. In fact, a lot of what you do in a place, if you have time, is walk around and learn it. We spent, afterwards, I took my wife to Florence for 3 weeks. We went to a lot of museums. We did not once buy a map to find out where the museums were. We knew that there were a lot of museums in the central part of Florence, near the Ponte Vecchio, so we just walked around and found them. If I was writing a story about somebody moving to Florence or being in Florence, I would base it on our experiences. We learned about Florence by being in different places. We learned about the political struggles because the hotel we were staying in was built by the Pitti family, who were rivals of the Medicis, and Medici eventually destroyed them financially, and one of the few things left was this little tiny hotel. Even the Pitti Palace Museum, which is across the street, was eventually owned by the Medicis. Now, that was information it was kind of cool to find out. We found a little bit from the hotel manager, a little bit from the museum, and we went online and looked for some stuff. We looked for what we wanted to know. Some people who do world building think you need to know everything. But why would you? Really? You're not moving to Westeros. You're not moving to Narnia. You're not moving to Mars. You don't need to know everything. You need to know what you need to know. And maybe a couple of cool extra details just to, for flavor there. Let me check the time here.
You're fine. You have at least a half an hour
Oh,
or
good.
more still.
Do we have any questions at this point?
Questions? Anyone online have a question on Zoom?
Really? Come to a writer's
Come
talk about
on.
world building and nobody has a question.
Somebody ask a question out there.
Oh, I see a hand up.
I see someone.
Cisco.
Go ahead. Go ahead and talk.
Hey,
You're
John.
online.
Hey, Cisco.
Quick, one thing you were talking about, like when you're the rules.
Mhm.
So, earlier this week in ask your question, you mentioned something about, you would take a werewolf over a vampire anytime, right? And so, are there certain rules where you're like, okay, well, because I know there's some other books where it's like, no, the vampires are way stronger than the werewolves, or vampires aren't, they actually glitter when in the sun versus bursting into flames. How do you, are there certain rules you just don't break, or how do you
Excellent question, and it really segues into where I was going next. So thank you for being psychic. So let's look at Dracula as an example, right?
Mhm.
Landmark book. Because of Dracula, we all know the word vampire. Had Dracula not been written, that word might have faded from common usage. It was not a popularly used word that much. There had been some vampire stories before that. What's the name? Carmela? Carmela. By Sheridan Le Fanu, and a few others, written before that. Byron's short story, The Vampire, and so on. Now, what Bram Stoker did is he wanted to write a story about a vampire because he loved some of the short stories he had read. So he wanted to do a vampire story. He wanted to do it somewhat in where it was started, or where he thought the vampire legends were strong, and then move to London. He originally planned to have the vampire be Italian, because he had been to Italy and it was creepy. There was a lot of tombs and other places to go there. He thought it was creepy. And that's where he actually first encountered people who still believed in vampires in some of the towns. And then as he started doing research, one of his friends gave him a book called The Land Beyond the Forest. And The Land Beyond the Forest is the English translation for the place Transylvania. That's what Transylvania means, the land beyond the forest. And in it, it told about a lot of legends of spooky creatures. Now, weird fact, Romania does not have vampire legends, not one. They have ghost legends, the strigoi, and different generations in Romania have changed what strigoi means. For a while, during the witch hunter days, strigoi was what they called witches. Most of the time, it's an invisible ghost. Also, he mentions the word Nosferatu, right, which he saw in the book. Anybody know what the word Nosferatu means? You've all seen Dracula. What does it mean? Okay, Bram Stoker and everyone else defines Nosferatu as undead. It does not mean undead. The word means plague carrier, that which brings sickness. So the original Romanian vampire, if you want to call it that, was a ghost, an invisible ghost, who would come into houses and suck the life breath out of a sleeping body, often children. It is the basis it is the way they interpreted or tried to understand what we now call sudden infant death syndrome. Healthy child goes to bed, dies, no bites, no marks, no nothing. Something had to kill it. Couldn't have been God. Why would God hurt innocent children? So it has to be something other than God. They go to the village priest or shaman, or depending on whatever culture it is, and say, my child died overnight. Why? And as is typical, they will say, evil forces did this. If you say these prayers and put these charms up, it'll never happen again. Sudden infant death syndrome almost never hits the same family twice. So what happens is they start believing that those prayers and charms and so on actually worked. Believing that there's a devil, a demon, a monster creates a kind of balance to their cosmology. They can't accept that a loving God would do this, no matter what culture you're in. A loving God wouldn't kill a child. There must be something that's the anti-God. And since it could be thwarted in doing it again, the power of the church was such that they could fight it off. And it actually it increased their attachment to the religion. Now, we in the 21st century look back on that, and that seems like something out of a fantasy movie, right? Because it's an invisible spirit, and it killed a child, and they used stuff to block it and keep it out. and it couldn't come back in again. That's what Stoker read. Now, he also read about other types of vampires. He took his idea of an Italian nobleman, just moved him and made him a nobleman in Transylvania, and took the invisible ghost idea and made the vampire a ghost, because Dracula even said, "I am a ghost," right? He is a ghost who can manifest a physical form. He can turn to dust whenever he wants. By the way, a little side note, has anybody ever read Dracula? How did he die? Yes, a cowboy and an English knight stabbed him to death, a kukri knife and a Bowie knife. It was not staked. Stakes were never used anywhere in Europe to kill a vampire. Iron nails were used in witches and monsters because it supposedly broke the connection between the flesh and spirit. For some reason, iron got that reputation. But stakes, not a factor. The stakes, not to kill. The stakes were used to hold the vampire down in its coffin or on the ground, so they could perform the ritual of exorcism, beheading, stuffing the mouth with garlic, etc. Stoker used a lot of that. Van Helsing used some of the old rituals, mostly used against witches, the belief in witches back then, and just transferred it over to vampires. What he did is he took real historical stuff and fictionalized it to suit his novel. That is what we're talking about in this class right now, in this program right now, taking the real world and using it as the framework to tell fantasy stories. Now, just let me poll you. How do you kill a vampire? Not the stake, but how do you kill a vampire? Or what might keep a vampire out? What's a vampire afraid of? Sunlight? Garlic? Crosses? Holy water? Running water. Okay. Who said crosses? Okay. No, you'll be dead. Who said garlic? Okay. You'll probably be alive with garlic, you two. Garlic is the only one of those things mentioned that is in vampire folklore. Garlic is a blood purifying herb, or whatever, tuber, whatever it is. Every culture that has vampire beliefs and also has garlic as a crop, garlic is used against vampires in every culture around the world. It is, and in the movies though, it's not, garlic doesn't kill the vampire. They use garlic flowers. It's kind of like a bear repellent for vampires. Garlic is poison to vampires in every culture where it exists. It kills them. They downplayed it for some reason. Stoker didn't want garlic to be that easy, to be an easy fix. What about a vampire not coming in your house unless invited? Now, that's a bit of world building he did, because there is basically nothing that would keep a vampire out in folklore. They could just come right in. So he invented the idea of a vampire could not enter a house being sanctified because the marriage vows and blah, 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 that people living there. He decided to have that be a proof against vampire entry and say that a vampire couldn't enter without invitation. The reason he did that is because he had made Dracula so powerful in the first third of his novel that by the time Dracula got to England, he'd just kill everyone. So it would basically be more of a novella or maybe in a pamphlet rather than a novel, because it would be over too quickly. He had to build in weaknesses. He talked about sacred bullets. That was something mentioned in some folklore. They would have to cut runes into bullets and bless the bullet for it to be of use. But the cross and the Eucharist were used in Dracula and have been used ever since. Never in folklore was the cross or Eucharist used against vampires. Never. In any vampire belief, and there are thousands of different vampire types in folklore, not once was the cross or the Eucharist used. The thing that most often kept the vampire out is putting garlic around the windows and doors, around the frames. Sunlight. What about sunlight? Does that kill a vampire?
Yes.
If you read Dracula, you're going to say no, because Dracula walked around during the day. He was just a little less powerful. Where did sunlight come into the thing? Another storyteller needed to change the structure of the story to fit their needs. So when they were filming the movie Nosferatu, a silent film, 1922, they had gone over budget. A lot of the cast and crew had already deserted. They basically had, the guy playing the vampire, the woman playing his victim, and like 5 or 6 crew. And the lighting guy said, Well, we're not going to be able to afford to film the big ending that was in the script. We all know that. So why don't we do this? Since we've always shot the vampire in darkness, they want to make him creepy. Why don't we make it that he can't abide the light and have sunlight kill him and have the woman kind of seduce him to keep her in his room until the sunlight comes to the window and kills the vampire. And the director is like, yeah, sure, fine, whatever, let's do that. And from that point on, vampires turning to dust after they're staked, we saw that in movies. It's a very easy way to get rid of the body. When they did the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that got even more play because they realized, script-wise, it would be ponderous for them to have to get rid of all the bodies of all the vampires that Buffy kills. So they turned to dust. All of these things were invented by writers as their way of building the world into the version of it, of the story they want to tell. That is world building. Do we have another question?
We do have a question in the chat. Jeff wants to know that you mentioned that a story should be written to a 9 truths to 1 lie ratio.
If possible.
If the story is set in the future, would your story's truth be tied more to human interaction rather than advanced technology?
Humans interaction, but actually science. Science is not going to age out. We're going to learn more about it, maybe change some things, but gravity is going to be gravity. Airlessness in the void is going to be airlessness. There's not going to be sound in space. There are so many things that are that are there in science that aren't going to change. I write 2 science fiction series as well. I write 4 books a year. So one of my series called Necrotech is set 250 years in the future. Another series is set 400 years in the future. Gravity is still an issue. Faster than light travel is something that is probably not possible, so we have to come up with, that's where the world building comes in. Because we can't do faster than light because of Einsteinian relativity, what are the ways around it? Well, Star Trek, they created the warp bubble. It creates a field, a state around the ship that allows it not to be affected by, by relativity. It's not going to turn into energy when it goes the speed of light. Time's not going to be distorted by that. All of which are true because time moves at different speeds the faster you move. Time around a black hole moves differently than time around our own sun, even though the black hole was a sun. So you use that to build a lot of the backstory. If you're going to have a spaceship that does something, make sure that the foundation of the physics and engineering of the ship makes sense so that it then supports the fantasy. So I have a ship called a Tumbler. They're fighter craft, where they create a state. And I looked into particle physics and string theory and talked to some scientists who said a lot of things that I barely understood, but I was able to get them to drill down and make it make sense to me. Created a state. In a state, I wanted a kind of a state around these ships, and the ships are cube shapes, where in that state, inertia is canceled. The state itself moves faster than, moves fast, but it's already energy, so it doesn't have to convert to energy to be able to move at those high speeds, but there's a protected area within that, similar to the warp bubble in Star Trek. And one of the things I added to it, because it's a fighter ship, not a cruiser, is that anytime they needed to change direction, the ship changes direction within the state, and it is now going in that direction. The state prevents, because it dampens inertia, the ship doesn't feel that inertial pull, but it just changes directions going in that direction. I talked to a couple of physicists about that, and they said, if we could create a null state around an object, yes, it could change direction without the problems of inertia, nor would they have to fire all sorts of jets to maneuver. 90% of that is still real science. The last, maybe 15% of it's fudged. But that 15% of it is fudged based on real science, though. It's if real science can do this, what are some of the leading theories about faster than light travel, or just simply advanced travel in outer space? You can get tons of that. I based it on a theory that a MIT student had one year, sadly unprovable, but it was a theory that he'd written as a paper. I thought it was a great idea. So I had come up with the idea and then went looking for substantiation and found someone who had already had that idea, who was actually a physicist. Very cool. So I was able to know that if a science-based person was reading the story, they're not going to look at it and say, that's total crap. What they're going to look at is, well, maybe someday. That's the kind of reaction you want when you start putting twists into science fiction. You want that maybe someday thing. And I love all that kind of stuff. Now, part of that series also dealt with matter teleportation, transporters. If anybody has seen Star Trek and has any background in science, there are a whole bunch of issues with teleportation. First off, Dr. McCoy was always correct. It is, you are dying every time you go through a transporter. You are being annihilated, and your body is being reconstructed, a new version of it somewhere else. A copy of it is being made somewhere else. The original version of you is gone forever. They tried playing with that Next Generation, tried to explore some of the science. And in more recent Star Trek Strange New Worlds, they even talk about using the pattern buffer, like when you dissolve someone, keeping that pattern in storage. The doctor on the ship does it with his daughter who's terminally ill. So until he can find the cure, she's staying in the pattern buffer. Now, that pattern buffer thing would have been a bit too far if it had been the first time we dealt with matter teleportation, but it was like the 5th Star Trek show, or maybe even the 6th. We're now comfortable with the whole beam me up, Scotty stuff, despite the fact that it doesn't work. But Caltech, MIT, and a bunch of other universities here and around the world have been working on matter teleportation since the 50s. The 50s. We have been able to send a photon across a room. Took enormous energy to do it, but we did it. So matter teleportation is possible. Teleporting organic matter is not. So when I did the story, in order for something to be teleported, you need to send a receiver to it. It's like you can blast out radio all day long, but can any of us hear the current radio waves that are going through this room right now? We can't. There's no receiver. So in order for the science to work right, and for the readers to be able to suspend disbelief, who have probably given some thought, especially the ones who are science-minded, given some thought to teleportation and other things, we have to be able to say, okay, well, this is what can happen. This is what absolutely cannot. And in fact, the cannot stuff is useful when a character in the story thinks it works and asks, and then gets an explanation. It allows you a brief info dump via dialogue, which is the best place to do info dumps, via small sections of dialogue. And what we get is enough of an understanding of the potentials of matter teleportation, which, by the way, you're not being teleported, you're being transponded. That's the phrase they like using. And then go a little further with it and make it feel like it's just an extension of rational thought that we have now. We have tried teleporting tardigrades, these little microscopic animals they're also known as water bears, these 8-legged, horrible-looking little monsters. I have a stuffed one on my desk. I think they're adorable. Most people think they're horrible-looking little monsters. We've tried teleporting them, and they disappeared. Now, we think, the scientists think, well, clearly they were annihilated by the process. In my story, they weren't. They were just sent to the far side of the galaxy, and other creatures found them and made them bigger, and now they're a threat when we go over there. Anything about science that you can imagine, somebody else is already working on its next iteration. You know, I mentioned DARPA earlier, the defense group, but there are a lot of groups out there that are working on these things. They will eventually crack a lot of this stuff. We don't know what yet. We don't know how yet, because there are things about science we know we don't yet know. We don't know what dark energy is. We don't know what dark matter is. We're getting closer to a theory about what dark matter is, but we don't actually know. We're now doubting the Big Bang, because now there's evidence there's a galaxy out there that is as old as the Big Bang. So it is a fully formed galaxy that showed up right after the Big Bang. Doesn't make sense in terms of physics, but we found it, so it's there. Therefore, we don't understand. And also, you know, the known universe is this big. The universe that exists, we don't know how big it is, but no matter how big it is, it can't be everywhere because of infinity. So time is the same way. We know, we measure time going back to the Big Bang, with 17 billion years ago, something like that, 14 billion, somewhere in that zone. We don't know what was before it. And also, all that matter that supposedly came out of a little tiny thing that blew up, compressed matter, where did that matter come from? Now, because scientists don't know, that opens it up for storytelling to explain. what became, like in Marvel, the characters like Galactus is from the universe that died so that the Big Bang could happen. Kind of cool, you know. So he's older than our galaxy and therefore not bound as much by its rules. Or you could do a story where some a creature from the older version of the galaxy comes into this one, it has new rules, and they find that they're not able to do what they could do before. Either they're weaker or maybe even stronger because of the new set of physics here. But we know that we don't know everything. And any time there is a hole in what we know, that's a story opportunity. And there's already people trying to figure out what that might mean or how it would work, which means you can go online and you can look for theories on faster than light travel, matter teleportation, on the Big Bang, or whatever area of science you want, and you'll find the leading scientists' theories about it. And because they are actually the leading scientists' theories, if you take those and extrapolate them into your fiction, you're basing it on, it may not be known science, but is predicted science by rational voices who actually have a reason for their opinion. And it, again, adds some more weight to the extra steps you've taken to create this fantasy structure. I love the fact that you can do this with world building, with every kind of world building. Now, if you're going to do straight magic, you're going off into a different territory now, a different part of world building, where you're using less of a structure of reality because it's magic. And we can't yet prove that magic exists. Many cultures believe in it. Many religions have some version of it. Lazarus was raised from the dead, fish, loaves and fishes, that's miracles, magic tricks, kind of interchangeable words there. So since we want to create a magic system that makes sense, one of the best ways to do that is to look at belief systems that had magic in it. I spent a couple of months on the Navajo reservation years ago. A friend of mine was Navajo and invited me out after high school. I went to a couple of curing sings where they would do these beautiful sand paintings. The Yata Ali, the shaman, would do these sand paintings. There would be ritual sings and so on. And then at the end, they would destroy the sand paintings so that it had either contained all of the negativity it was trying to erase or heal, and then you would destroy it, in which case you would remove it, or it had done its work and it was now an empty battery, in which case you would destroy it. But what if, and this is where we're going to fiction, I'm sitting there as a kid, I wasn't even writing fiction at the time, I wanted to write nonfiction, but sitting there as a kid who had read a lot of stuff, look at that sand painting, like the only person really allowed to touch it is the shaman, or if you've probably seen Tibetan monks make these sand paintings too, and they do the same thing. They'll make a big mandala, then destroy it. What if someone who is not in spiritual harmony with that sand painting touched it? Now, probably you would just get yelled at for messing up a sand painting, or it would be wrong or whatever. But in fiction, we get to play with a consequence that actually could happen. So what if somebody leans too close and looks at the sand painting and then falls through it? Oh, now you have a story. Sand painting, cultures do sand paintings. You can have somebody do a sand painting. You can have them do an image made with vegetables or colored stones or pieces of sea glass. It doesn't matter what it is. That ritual is inspired by real rituals. And the rules governing those real rituals, that's a tongue twister, are something you can take and amend into your magic system. My friend Brandon Sanderson, who's one of the most popular fantasy writers in the world right now, writes doorstop novels. He is known for building magic systems. He teaches workshops on building magic systems. He is brilliant at them. And every single magic system has its roots in some mythological or religious belief. Every single one. And that allows him to have a rich body of work. Now, you could find, say, maybe 1,000 bits of information about Tibetan sand paintings, right? Because they're more documented than Navajo ones are. You can find all that information. You can pick the stuff that relates most to the type of story you want to tell and tweak them, just as Bram Stoker tweaked the information about vampires. Just as Alexander Dumas, he is Three Musketeers. He wrote the first werewolf novel, by the way, The Wolf Leader. Most of you don't know that. He did that. Really cool. He took werewolf legends and twisted them for that. He wanted the magic that created werewolves to be different to support the story that he had in his mind to tell. We have complete license to do that. We're writing fiction. We are the gods of that universe. We can do whatever we damn well please. But if we want to sell it, we've got to make sure that works. And that's why I like that 90-10 split, because I want the people to buy into the fantasy. I want them to believe it's real. I have people asking me questions about what a particular fantasy character would do or think in certain situations. It's like, one of my own fantasy characters. They're actually, they know it's a fake character, but at the same time, it's become real enough to them to wonder what else that person does, thinks, is, was, whatever. And that's incredible. I have this character, Nicodemus, who's a trickster spirit. Now, I've mentioned before that he is as old as the earth. He was born with it. He's a trickster spirit like Loki and Anansi and Coyote and some of the other trickster spirits in different cultures. He has no origin story. He's always been. But he's a chaos spirit. So he gets involved in a lot of adventures, in my Joe Ledger series, he's going to be in my Sleepers War series, he's already in my Kagan the Dam series. He takes on different personas depending on what mischief he wants to get up to. I based him on Anansi and Coyote. Coyote is in Navajo and a few other indigenous people's beliefs is a trickster. He is not evil. Chaos causes change. It is, in fact, something changing at any time. That's what chaos is. So a chaos spirit thrives on change. And the best way, things change more during conflict. So if you create conflict or doubt or mistrust or hate or whatever else, things are going to change. Now, they're not looking for change for the better. It's the change they like. It's kind of like that line from Batman, I forget which of the Batman movies it was, where they were trying to figure out why the Joker does something, and Alfred says, well, some people just like to see the world burn. Well, that's what a chaos trickster would be. And in fact, in this book, when Mr. Church is talking to somebody, Magira's boss is talking to Nicodemus, he actually quotes that thing, and he gets busted for making a pop culture reference by his... So I even give a nod to where that pop culture reference comes. And in whatever Batman movie that was, that line about just want to see the world burn comes from one of the legends, Navajo legends about Coyote, because Coyote would sometimes, he would draw lightning to himself, and he would stand near something that will burn. So then as soon as lightning hits, it goes away from it. Now there's a fire. The fire could be somebody's favorite tree, could be their house, a hogan, could be anything. But now it's a fire causing chaos. He just simply was there because lightning doesn't like Coyote and wants to keep hurting him, so he keeps running to places where the lightning will strike so that he creates chaos. That's all part of a belief system. You can take those belief systems, give characters new names, give them new elements, and you have something that's essentially there for you to borrow. Look how much of Greek myth shows up in things like Game of Thrones and so on. Percy Jackson, whether they call it, like in Percy Jackson, they're actually naming the source, but in Game of Thrones, there's a lot about what goes on in the kingdoms that comes out of both England's history, the War of the Roses and other things, but also the way in which the gods of the Greek mythology were constantly infighting with one another. That allowed him to take some of those elements and give them to Cersei. The Lannisters are, basically this pantheon, and the Starks are another pantheon. And the Starks are the Norsemen, basically, in that story. If you want to create a great magic system, read history. Read history about religions, about magic. Look at them and then use that as a basis, because it is an already structured thing. What you want to do is take it and make it uniquely your own. And that shortens the process of world building for you, because that world has already existed in one way or another. There were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who believed that at some point in Earth's history, whatever religion that is. There was always a group that believed it. There are still some people, you go to the Navajo res or the Yaqui res or any of the other res, there are still people there who believe fully in their cosmology and their religion. We sometimes make the offensive mistake of thinking that's all mythology and folklore. Well, it's anything that's not what your belief system appears like folklore, but it's somebody else's belief system. And those belief systems are vital still. And there are people you can call and talk to about them. So if I wanted to do something dealing with Lakota Sioux, you can actually call Lakota Tribal Council and you can ask questions. You don't have to be writing about Lakota Sioux, but you want to base something on their cosmology, and you want to be fair and accurate about it. They'll talk to you, as they did when I was writing Ghostwalkers. And they also provided me with translations into Lakota Sioux for one of the characters. We have time yet for more questions. You do. Yes. Do you run out of things to talk about? Oh, no. I have a 7-hour version of this talk. So I just want to make sure that I'm not skipping questions if people have them to ask.
Let's monitor some questions then. Anybody in the room? Anybody in the room have a question?
Like a challenge you're trying to solve in your own world building, perhaps?
If not, anybody on Zoom? It has a.
Well,
you guys have no questions.
I'm impressed.
Oh,
okay,
Ronnie. Ronnie has a question.
I'd like to fit earlier you mentioned the information done by dialogue. Right? How can we introduce more aspects of the world building more through dialogue itself? What's an approach?
Okay, so there.
Repeat the question.
Right. So the question is, how can we use dialogue to do more world building? To refine that, especially when it comes to imparting information, critical information. So I'll give you a couple different examples of that. In my Joe Ledger series, since the world of Joe Ledger, all the things that go on take place in our world, but a version of our world. So if I need something on Yersinia pestis, Black Plague, which is the bioweapon, a weaponized version of it is the bioweapon for this book, I talk to my science guy, and I usually ask him. Well, first I ask him, can this be modified? How could it be modified? Can we make it more effective in terms of how quickly you get it, how quickly the symptoms present, and so on. Get those information, and that's great. But when I want to know treatment stuff, that's usually where it gets more complicated. So I'll say, well, how can the scientists in the book combat this? And I say, please give it to me in 2 different ways. Tell me what that scientist would say to another scientist. Give me that phrasing, because it's going to be filled with science jargon that me and most of the readers will never understand. And then I ask, can you also tell me how you, as a scientist, would explain it to an intelligent person who is not a scientist, meaning my main character? And they give me that version of it. So I might have the really complex version, somebody start off explaining to them the really, the nuts and bolts, the deep science of it, and it's going to be incomprehensible. So I'm not going to let it go on that long. Somebody talk maybe a couple of sentences before the hero's going, yeah, and in English that sounds like what, or how does that, give it to us, those of us who came on the short bus. Give me that version of it. There's some joke way or some conversational way of saying, no, I'm not understanding that. Could you please put it in simpler terms? And then you have the other phrasing that puts it in simpler terms. You can actually go longer with that explanation because now it's in conversational English as opposed to scientific jargon. In a magic system, I had in the second of my Kagan books, the middle book, Son of the Poison Rose, there was some stuff about this culture that they're going to that had fallen down into barbarism and cannibalism, and some temples and some stuff that I borrowed from H.P. Lovecraft because he made his stuff open source when he was still alive. And different people will impart bits of the information at different times. Because if you have a group of people going to a strange place where they know there's going to be danger and they have to do something, they're going to talk about it. They don't get a lecture up front and never talk about it again. I know too many soldiers, there's a lot of information that goes back and forth, a lot of opinions and suggestions and experiences that are shared so that by the time the team gets there, they're able to do their work. Same in a fantasy setting. Have somebody explain it. Sometimes when Gandalf was speaking to the hobbits, he would talk a little bit about, the important stuff, the big picture, Elven and history of Middle Earth. In the best scenes, there's a bit of that And then he simplifies what he's saying to make it kind of hit home to the less educated hobbits, those who are not 5,000 years old, like Gandalf is. And so between the partial full explanation and the conversational reinterpretation for the everyman, you cover all the bases. And the trick is resisting going further than what the character actually needs to know to move forward in the story. Because I am such a science junkie. When I do research for my books, whether it's Ron Coleman or my friend who's a former State Department guy or other historians that I work with, when they give me information, they'll give me this much. And I'll cut and paste all of it into my manuscript and highlight it yellow. If it's highlighted yellow, I know none of it is my words, none of it's my writing. But I want the information in that chapter, and I'll just move on from there. I'll write the rest of the scene and move on. I do a revision pass where I go through and take all big bulk information and carve it down. Now knowing what the entire book is, I can then make a choice of what backstory, what world building, what information the character and the reader need to know, because the protagonist and the reader are kind of similar in their need to know things. Usually they're the ones finding information. Harry Potter constantly learns from his teachers and a lot from Hermione and Ron, in those books. He's gathering information for his fight. So when I cut it down, I'm probably leaving, if I get, say, 1,000 words of science information from my expert, probably about 200 of those words are going to make it into the story. It's going to be a paragraph or less, or maybe a couple of sentences here and there. I might even parse out the conversation between that guy and a doctor in different places throughout the book. Because when we first realize it's weaponized Yersinia pestis, that's one conversation. And then when somebody dies, after hours of exposure, that's a whole different conversation because the infection rate's not that fast. So the part of that information I got about infection rates, it belongs later on when they're seeing the rate of infection. Another part about which antibiotics are used to treat it will be in a different part when they get to the point where now they're devising the treatment. That's another part of the book. Writers who do research and love research as much as I do tend to want to group it all together. And that's where it gets to be a ponderous read for for somebody picking up the book, listening to an audio or whatever, because it's too much information and they're not going to remember all of it because not all of it is in context to the scene. Some of it may be in context to the novel, but if it's not parsed so that we learn that as we need it, it's easy to forget it. And then later on, somebody would be, well, I don't know that. They're forgetting they read a big diatribe before. Take out cut it down to conversation, And when you're in conversation with people, one of the things to do is, this is an odd thing, at parties, sometimes I will watch people when they talk, I'll just loiter. People think I'm shy, I'm not. I actually watch people. The way in which people talk in stories, dialogue is great. People don't talk generally in long lectures. They're bits and pieces interrupted by questions. Sometimes they'll start one thing and they'll interrupt themselves because a new idea occurred and they'll go on that tangent. Two things about that. One, if you're interviewing an expert, do it via email. They'll give you the full thing and they won't interrupt themselves, so you have a fuller answer and you don't have to take the time to transcribe it. And also, the second part of it is nobody would really say that in a conversation. Even when I'm talking to my friend Ron, like we're having lunch or something, I'm not going to sit there for an hour and a half and listen to a lecture. I'm going to ask a question, he's going to tell me something, we'll talk about that a little bit, we'll go on to something else, we'll come back to that. And that's how the information should be parsed throughout the book. All world building should, as my view at least, world building is best done as the character needs to know it, as the reader needs to know it. Sometimes the character needs to know everything. Sometimes, if we have an omniscient point of view, the reader may need to know something the character doesn't. In my horror novels, my Pine Deep novels, it's the omniscient voice of the book that is often talking about the town itself. But I write it almost as if the book is talking to us, not that I'm just doing a travel brochure for visiting that creepy little town. Do we have time for any more questions?
No more
crap.
questions. However, we do have time for any closing comments that you want to make.
Okay, so a couple of books that I recommend for world building. Joe Abercrombie's The First Law series, absolutely brilliant. The Witcher series, I don't recommend reading. There's way too much information that doesn't apply. Sarah Moss is an excellent writer, and Brandon Sanderson. Those two are really superb at creating magic systems that feel lived in. They feel like, of course, that's the magic system for this world. They're great. Roger Zelazny's the 9 Princes in Amber, and it's 4 sequels. There's actually 10 books in the series, but the first 5, the world building, they're short novels. And you go through 2 chapters, you could write the next book in the series because you know so much about the world, and yet it's characters finding out in the moment all through the book. There's no lectures, there's no giant info dumps, it's characters finding out as they go, and that informs us. It's one of the reasons he had one of the main characters have amnesia in the beginning, so that he would have to relearn his own culture. So those books are great. And the John D. McDonald, Travis McGee novels I mentioned earlier create the area around Fort Lauderdale as a real place, and the culture of people living on boats there as a real place. Read those as well. So those are great homework. Also, you guys can always ask questions of me even after today. My email address is Jonathan_Maberry. If you just spell my last name right, there's no Y in the middle of my name. It's M-A-B. But I invite you guys here and online to ask questions, because those of us in the trade want you in the trade. This is the truth. So if we can answer questions that can help you get past a speed bump or something you don't know, or a trick that might help you, ask, because we'd rather see you in print, because we want stuff to read. We want your stuff. And also, I do a weekly Ask Me Anything, 4 to 5 every Thursday. It's also a good place to ask questions too. Some people think that an Ask Me Anything is ask me about me all the time. That's not what an Ask Me Anything means. You can ask any question, especially writers, ask any questions, and you're going to get an answer. One last thing, if anyone, Michelle is one of our regulars, down at Mysterious Galaxy in San Diego, on the first Sunday of every month from noon to 3, we have a free 3-hour networking thing called the Writers Coffee House. It is writers talking about writing. It's free, as I said. It is facilitated by myself, and if I'm not there, one of my New York Times bestseller friends like Scott Sigler or Peter Kleins will host it, and you can get an incredible amount of information. Just come and ask some questions or just listen to the conversation. But the main thing, last thing I'll say here as a takeaway, is that the more you learn about how storytelling works by studying the works that's loud. The more you can learn about writing and the writing world by studying writing that has been done well, by finding books where it was done well, that you can't see the carpentry, but you can feel the effect, right? That's the way you get ahead. That's the way you become a more practiced writer, by being a more dedicated reader and reading into your genre. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'd like to add one more author to that list of people you should read for world building, and that would be Jonathan Maberry. Yeah, I don't know, some guy. And The Rotten Ruin, the world building is phenomenal. It's young adult. I don't like zombies. I've never read anything about zombies. And
it was literally marketed as a zombie novel for people who don't like zombies.
And it's great.
Marketed that way.
I loved the entire series, read the whole thing. Can't wait until it's a series on television.
It's going to be a movie. We're in
movie?
development.
Okay, see, learn something new. Also, Writers Coffee House, great place to learn things. I've been going for several years whenever I can make the drive. Go, you learn so much. I just sit there like a mouse and just absorb. One last thing, Jonathan gave us an amazing blurb prior to publication for our anthology, Menagerie, compilation of stories, poems, and musings. So as a gift, we would like to give you a copy.
Awesome.
There you go, your own copy. That is original artwork. We hired an artist for that because we believe in supporting other art forms as well. Very quickly, Lynette is going to tell us about our next month's meeting, and then we'll do a couple closing remarks. Lynette?
Well, next month is our annual celebration of poetry. So for all of you who are members, you can bring 1 or 2 original poems. And if you say, I'm not a poet, I'm just a writer, bring your favorite poem to share, and a little bit about why you may have written the poem or why a particular poem speaks to your heart. So there's no limit because poetry is so wide open. Your favorite style might be haikus. You may love Dr. Seuss or maybe Emily Dickinson. It doesn't matter. Poetry is poetry. We want to share what you love. So go ahead and send a message to the Guild's email address so I can put up a speaking list and order everybody. And we are really looking forward to this. Is like our 9th, 10th, 11th, something like that, celebration of poetry. So come join us next month for those readings.
Thank you. Lynette organizes that every year. Give her a round of applause.
Can I make a quick comment about poetry? I just want to make a real quick comment about poetry.
Okay.
Because I think poetry is amazing. It's underappreciated in the United States and should be more appreciated. I'm so proud of you guys for doing this. I read poetry every day before I write my prose. Poetry helps me write better prose. The ability of a poet to take a complex idea and distill it down to a few words, to a few images, is brilliant, and it helps you write better prose. And I can't stress enough how to do that. And the person who got me into reading poetry every day, Ray Bradbury, gave me a big book of poetry when I was 12. And every time I saw him, he had me explain one of the poems I read. It is an amazing resource. And the fact that you guys have a poetry celebration and there's poetry in your anthology speaks highly of this group. I have great respect for this group.
Thank you, Jonathan. It means a lot coming from you. So with that, a couple quick reminders. Membership dues. If you're not a member, would like to join or have not renewed yet, don't forget to do that. We have the books in the back for the people needing to pick up their contributor copies and checks. Also, if you would like to purchase one, they're $15. We have some extras that you could purchase. And April 1st is when we will unfortunately have to take down any books on our website of people who didn't renew. So we'd love everybody to renew. We have about 360 books on our website with a paid membership of around 70 to 80 people. So it tells you we have a lot of prolific writers in our organization. Awesome. That's it. With that, we're going to adjourn and go to Emilio's for lunch. I will need a head count. Thank you all. We'll see you next month for poetry in April.
Thanks.